The opinions expressed by tonight's guest do not represent the opinions or position of Spaced Out Radio, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with SOR Media. Listener discretion is advised. Here at Spaced Out Radio, we are about to take you higher. Broadcasting from the Rocky Mountains of Colorado to you listening around the world. This is Spaced Out Sunday with host Tessa Nicole Thomas. You can follow Tessa on our Facebook page at Spaced Out Radio, on Twitter at TessaTNT, and you can subscribe to her YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio for the archive. But we break on command 'cause women rule the world. Buckle up, space travelers. Let the countdown begin.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
It's time to go for a ride with host Tessa Nicole Thomas.
I'm such a lucky guy, 'cause after all this time, it's like the deeper I go, the deeper I fall.
Good evening, Spaced Out Radio. Secure your tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the rocky tops of the La Platas. On a rocky mountain high, get sucked into the vortex of the Four Corners and settle down snugly at mile marker 419.9 in colorful Colorado. It is July, Saturday the 14th, Sunday the 15th for those of you on the East Coast and beyond. This is Spaced Out Radio. I hope you guys had a rockin' week, an awesome day, and an even better evening. I am your host, Tessa Nicole Thomas, and I am live tonight broadcasting from beautiful Bayfield, Colorado. We are 150,000 strong nightly on Spaced Out Radio Network, spacedoutradio.com, Spreaker, Paranormal Live, TalkStream Live, as well as Deep Talk Radio, which you can find at deeptalkradio.com. Don't forget to head to our website, spacedoutradio.com, where you can peruse the Spaced Out Radio store and read the encounter online, dealing with everything strange, paranormal, and odd. Tonight I have a treat for all you guys and gals out there. Tonight we will be talking to and getting to know Mr. Dan Shaw. Some people spend their life in search of the guru on the mountaintop. Dan Shaw has experienced the reverse. Teachers have come to him, and at the age of 7, Dan began doing gazing meditations and having psychic experiences. At 14, Dan was watching the dark night sky when a UFO flashed its lights from quite nearby below the horizon. Then in 1985, at 21 years old, at midnight, a visit from an enchanting stranger eventually led Dan from San Francisco area to Austin, Texas, where he began studying alchemy. In 1992, due to a series of divine interventions, Dan Shaw began to specialize in geomancy, a branch of alchemy focusing on the subtle energies of the earth. Dan travels extensively in the U.S. and abroad, researching sacred places with local vortex experts, and he corresponds with researchers all over the world. Dan Shaw earned a Bachelor of Science in Geography in 2001. Dan Shaw has authored a number of books on vortexes, including Vortex Field Guide North America, Letters from the Vortex, and U.S. Vortexes 54 miles wide, as well as Stonehenge gardening tips using earth energies in your garden. Dan Shaw can assess the subtle energies of your land, home, and business and help you to adjust the energetic field for greater harmony, health, and success. Dan is an extraordinary tour guide, leading groups to exotic locations. Dan Shaw is known for his enthusiastic presentation of complex ideas in ways that are fun and easy to understand for audiences of all ages. His live public presentations encompass a wide array of scientific and paranormal subjects, exhibit a collection of inspiring, beautiful images and visionary maps, and involve audiences in engaging participatory experiences. Hey Dan, welcome to the show tonight. It's so great to have you.
Thanks so much. I'm very glad to be with you tonight.
Yeah, like I was saying earlier, it's only been 2 weeks, but it's felt like forever. I'm so excited about this subject and get to know more about it with you.
And likewise, you have a tremendous amount of experience as well, and I always learn talking to individuals more about their local areas as well.
So just recently you started a new job in Montana. Can you tell our audience a little bit about that?
Sure. This is my third summer season leading tours at a tourist attraction called the Montana Vortex. So at the moment I'm in Columbia Falls, Montana, and there's a little spot just south of, east of Glacier Park, where there's a very peculiar energy. Montana's Bermuda Triangle, where we find all kinds of bizarre occurrences. It's one of 8 genuine tourist attractions, genuine vortexes, open as tourist attractions in the United States. Some of your listeners may have heard of or have visited Santa Cruz Mystery Spot or one of these other genuine vortex attractions in the U.S. And so I've been leading tours here this summer.
So have you had any really awesome experiences so far since you've been there?
Well, lots of wonderful people come through and up Highway 2 and pull over Montana Vortex. Some of them have heard about it. The fame spreads far and wide, and they have some idea what they're getting into. And some people have just pulled off for, the gift shop and have no idea what to expect at a vortex. And I'm continually surprised. At the vortex, we show people a number of very, very puzzling demonstrations. We do a number of different kinds of experiments. We see people apparently shrinking and growing as they move around the vortex. We find that gravity doesn't just pull down, but also pulls left and right, and people can actually see and feel how gravity seems to be pulling sideways. And at the Montana Vortex, we've got a little spot we call the aura spot, where in just about 5 minutes, almost everybody's able to learn how to see and feel the aura energy. And of course, some people come through and they're already familiar. They're already seeing auras and such. And I've learned quite a bit from them as they tell me what they're seeing and feeling around this just a little bit of a very beautiful wooded area. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was saying I'm so jealous of you. I wish I could be there, and you were actually saying they're hiring another tour guide.
If any of your listeners are good public speakers and are interested in this job where you kind of need interesting folks, we could use another tour guide at the Montana Vortex this summer. In fact, you can find it at montanavortex.com.
All right, so if you guys are interested in a job being a tour guide at the Montana Vortex, it's open to you at montanavortex.com. Well, in your bio, when I was reading that, it had mentioned gazing meditations. What exactly are gazing meditations?
There's a certain magic in gazing, and it's people often they think about like a fortune teller gazing into a crystal ball, and that's certainly one way to do a gazing meditation. You could also gaze into a mirror or a pool of water, or you could gaze at a mandala or a flame. When I was just about 7 years old, we moved into a new house, and my mom took me and my older brother to a shop that sold nothing but light fixtures. It was something of a Versailles of chandeliers and light fixtures. And among all that variety, I chose just a simple, plain sphere for my light fixture. And so when we moved into our new house, first night, and many, many nights after that, I would turn down the dimmer, turn down the light very low till the only thing that was visible was this ball of light above my bed. Didn't at the time know what I was doing, but as I gazed at this ball of light, that took me into a meditative state. It turns out that that effect is well known. It's sometimes called the Ganzfeld effect. It's almost like a kind of a snow blindness, and if you gaze even at the blue sky, if you look at an undifferentiated field of color, as the brainwaves shift and you go into a meditative state. You may have seen these 3D posters, the magic eye posters. They look like nothing but a bunch of dots until you relax, you defocus your eyes, kind of gaze past the poster, and then a picture pops up in 3D. And that's very similar to the technique that we use at the Montana Vortex to teaching people to see the aura energy, the magnetic field around the body, sometimes referred to as the aura. So there's this definite magic in gazing, and that's how I started out, I would say, down the path of expanded states and into the world of psychic experiences and the paranormal.
So what kind of psychic experiences did you have? Did you see a being or a person, and did you have communication with them?
Well, my first couple of psychic experiences were, I think, pretty mild. I had a couple of experiences, one actually at the San Francisco Giants Candlestick Park, and one at a roller skating rink, where just a moment before the thing happened, I already knew that it was going to happen. And, the first time that happened, I noticed and I wondered and I doubted what had happened. Was it just an idea? Would it happen again, etc.? I was not much interested in baseball, and I was pretty quickly bored with the baseball game. And I just had a thought occur to me as I was sitting there between my dad and my brother at Candle Park. I thought, what would happen if the catcher missed this next pitch? And Juan Marichal threw that pitch, and the catcher missed it. And at that moment, that kind of alerted me and opened my eyes to, hey, here's an interesting thing. I'll pay close attention. It might happen again. And then it did happen again in a way. At a roller skating rink, we were doing a cakewalk kind of a thing. There's numbers on the floor. People were skating around, stopping on numbers, and some people were then, the number would be called, and people were sent off the floor. It's kind of a game where, the last person on the floor wins some kind of a prize. So I was at the edge of the skating rink, and the moment before the next number was called, the number just popped into my head, and then it was called. And so that it was a pretty, I say, mild or modest kind of psychic experience, but it definitely opened me up to the possibility that, there's something happening here that maybe isn't talked about a lot, isn't well understood, something like that. So those were my first couple of psychic experiences. I actually had a couple similar experiences in the last couple of weeks. I'll say I was driving from Oregon to Montana a couple of weeks ago. I was driving through a place where I did not have cell service. But I was driving through, I was on the drive, I was thinking, well, this might be a good time to call a couple of friends. It was 4th of July. And so I tried to send a text to a friend of mine out of state, hadn't talked to in a long while, but the call wouldn't go through. The text wouldn't go through. Well, as soon as I came into an area where I had cell service, my phone made that ringing, the noise that I got a text, and it was from the person who I was attempting to text. So my friend Craig texted me right about the time that I was trying to text him. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners have had similar experiences like that, and to a certain extent you can kind of put those off to, coincidence, up to a point, but at a certain point you have to say, well, this is way beyond the realm of what might happen by coincidence. So I'm alert to those experiences because, I've had some miracles in my life, I must say.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and the mind is a very powerful thing, and so, it's important to try to control your thoughts, because if you do kind of go into that negative realm, you could have negative repercussions. But, for example, I was driving up this mountain road, and it was such a beautiful place, and I was thinking, if I ever died somewhere, I'd want it to be somewhere like this, And then on the way back down the mountain, I hit some corduroy and fishtailed, and I got it straight. And then all of a sudden, my car just jetted off the side of the road, and we had just barely missed a 500-foot drop-off, and we went off a 50-footer instead, and hit nose first and flipped a couple times and landed in this nice, soft patch of pine needles. Our Dalmatian was actually thrown out the moonroof, which is like a sunroof, but there is no window, and the car came to on him with his body in between the moonroof, and we were able to roll that off of him, and everybody came out unscathed. But it made me, second guess my thoughts. Let's not think things like that, because that one didn't turn out too good. But I do get that intuition or gut instincts a lot of time. I haven't been lucky enough to get numbers and such. If I were good at it like you, I might try to pick some lotto numbers.
Right. Well, that does bring us right to Vortexes, because we find that at Vortexes, our intentions tend to be heightened. At certain places, it seems as though the place itself is supportive of our psychic abilities. And at certain times, too, it may be that these vortexes and the lines of Earth energy, the ley lines, at solstices and equinoxes, for example, those may be activated, let's say, at certain specific times. And at those times, our intentions and our prayers can really be heightened. In my youth, I used to enjoy the original Star Trek series, and you may recall there's an episode of Star Trek where the crew takes shore leave on a planet where they have a number of bizarre experiences, including one of them actually, they mentioned, well, this is like Alice in Wonderland. They end up seeing Alice and a rabbit, and some of the crew have very pleasant experiences, others have very terrifying experiences, and it seems to be a planet where all their thoughts are manifest, and that is very much like a vortex in a way, where our thoughts become even more empowered to manifest in reality.
So when did you have your first paranormal or UFO experience?
Well, when I was 14 years old, living at home with my parents, we lived at the edge of the woods. There was a small mountain, large hill in our backyard. It was my backyard, effectively. If I wanted to get out of the house, it was a long ways down the road to any of my friends my age, and I just often play out in the woods, and so I was really familiar with these woods. There was no roads. It was all blocked off, open space, just a couple fire roads. And my folks had a tub. And at night, once everybody else had gone to bed, I would go around the house and turn out all the lights inside and out so that I could go out and sit in the hot tub under the stars and look up at the stars. And back in the early 70s, there weren't a lot of satellites up in the sky. It was infrequent that you might be able to see a satellite crossing the sky. And I'd sit out there and I'd look up the sky and watch for those satellites. And one night, hadn't been in the hot tub very long when there was a bright bank of lights. An array of lights appeared below the horizon, up between me and the hilltop, and it was clear from where I was sitting that, well, if these lights had been actually on the hillside, each one of these lights would have been at least as big as, let's say, the side of a train car. And there's an array of lights. It might have been 5 high and 5 wide, and these were kind of rectangular lights, and they momentarily flashed in a pattern of white, yellow, and orange, and then they were gone. And sitting there, I didn't know what it meant that I saw these lights, but it was clear to me that it meant something, and I got out of the hot tub, and I went and did what I think many ancient people have done when they have seen these kinds of paranormal things, UFOs or aliens. I went and wrote it down, as I think is recorded in many petroglyphs. Encounters with aliens and UFOs and such. If you had an experience like that, you'd probably go write it down somewhere, maybe scratch it onto a rock for posterity. Mm-hmm. So I went and wrote down my experience, knowing that I would want to remember it and that I might better understand it in the future. And it seemed clear at the time, too, that this craft, this UFO, had to have turned on its lights for my benefit, because this was at the end of the road in a valley, and there was really no one else who even might have seen this array of lights. And so I had, at that point, I realized that this is something I can't talk about. People might think I'm crazy, and I was quite right, too, because certainly when I did start talking about my, first of all, that really set me on the path of doubting everything, questioning authority, and really kind of looking behind the curtain. What aren't people talking about? And when I did start kind of going my own way, there was a lot of kind of blowback from my family, and people really did wonder if I had maybe gone off the deep end, let's say. So for my own self-protection, I was right in not talking about that experience at the time. But it took me decades, actually, to begin to share that experience. And now I like to follow the example of some of my friends, and I've taken the paranormal pledge, which is to go ahead and talk about these things. The minute that I begin sharing about my paranormal experiences The minute you begin sharing about your paranormal experiences, you find that other people feel more comfortable sharing theirs, and you find out quite a number of people have had some sort of paranormal experience. Maybe they've seen Bigfoot or some other kind of cryptic creature, fairies, or had psychic experiences. So it's very empowering to begin to share those experiences with people who you feel safe with, because you will find other people confirming your experiences and then confiding their experiences as well.
Yeah, and that's why I love the chat room here so much. We generally have something in common with someone else, or we can corroborate each other's stories, or you just feel comfortable sharing because everybody seems to be sharing their different experiences, etc. And so yeah, when I first came here, it was just as a listener, and I just love everybody. It's like a paranormal family to me, someone that I can discuss things with and feel comfortable. And yeah, it's great to have like-minded people and not feel judged or humiliated in any way.
Yes. It's kind of a vulnerable place because, we all desire respect. We want to have credibility, and, people do take a risk that they are going to lose credibility if they begin to talk about their UFO sightings or their Bigfoot sightings or whatever it might be. But very important to share those things, because we do find out that we're not in the minority.
Yeah, there's a lot of us out there, and that's really reassuring and comforting. So, how many UFO experiences have you had? Have you had them throughout your life or just in your younger years?
That was really just the one, and I didn't become obsessed with UFOs or the paranormal at that time. Often we find that, when we first get the call, let's say, so to speak, the timing may not be right, and we kind of reject the call in a certain sense. And, it kind of has to gestate for a while before it kind of reaches fruition. So I didn't get crazy about UFOs or anything. Oddly, that was around the time that the movie Close Encounters came out. And 30 years or so later, when I started sharing my UFO experience, one of my friends said to me, well, gee, that sounds a lot like the lights in Close Encounters. And I had to go back and rewatch the movie. In fact, my experience was very much similar to the bank of lights that you see in Close Encounters. When the UFO comes down, they've got some hand signals and some sounds associated, and there's a bank of lights, a lot more colors in the movie. But it turns out, of course, the people who produced the movie did their homework. One of the advisors to the movie was a guy who had worked on Project Blue Book. So you will definitely find a grain of truth in the movie there. And my experience, the bank of lights that I saw, was amazingly similar to the bank of lights you see in Close Encounters. The thing is, when I saw the movie Close Encounters, my takeaway was actually the scene where the Richard Dreyfuss character is piling mashed potatoes onto his plate in a way that he doesn't know what he's doing, but he's building this pile of mashed potatoes that looks like Devil's Tower, and the Terry Garr character is just mortified. And so my takeaway was, if I talk about this experience, people are going to think I'm crazy.
Yeah.
So I didn't go crazy, so to speak, about UFOs. I'm not fixated on UFOs in any way. I haven't had any further UFO experiences. But then at the age of 21, as you read in the introduction, I had a visit in the middle of the night. I was working at a tofu shop, actually, in Fairfax, California, which is north of San Francisco. And a fellow appeared at the window of the tofu shop, a stranger, but a kind-looking stranger, and I wanted a break, and the guy looked pleasant and curious, and I invited him into the shop, which was tiny shop where it's a kitchen where we're actually boiling the soybeans and making the dough, which is that soybean soup before it's pressed into the cubes. Yeah, I had a brief interaction with this person, and just felt great. I gave him a block of tofu, and we gave each other a hug, and the person then kind of continued on down this dark street. And as he was leaving, I said, well, how will I get a hold of you? He said, well, I'll get a hold of you. And from that point, everything in my life started to change. Things, kind of threads came together, and I ended up from there going to Austin, Texas. And that was around the conception of my son, my wife and I looking for a place for natural birth. There was a midwife in Austin, Texas, whose name's Rima Starr, who specialized in water birth. And so we ended up, my wife and I, going to Texas. She gave birth in water. My son's a water baby. He's 30 years old plus now. And that group, she was part of a group in Austin, Texas, who were studying with the Ascended Masters. They had a number of people who were channeling. They were doing Chinese medicine and all kinds of various healing techniques, using transcendental meditation and any number of techniques. And it became clear, it was revealed to me, that this being who had visited me was actually an Ascended Master in disguise. He later told me, I call him Father Andre, he later told me that he did come to me in disguise. He didn't say when, but he said I would remember. And well, I think the next time I went shopping and to pick up a block of tofu, it kind of all came crashing down, and I realized, oh my gosh, this stranger really did get a hold of me. And those years, 1986, 1987, right around the time of the harmonic convergence, were, a real high point in my life, in my paranormal growing up. And that being I call Father Andre, still one of the most, if not the most eloquent and profound being I've ever heard from. And I continue to find his wisdom comforting, and I continue to share it. And it seems the things I learned then do seem to comfort and help other people as well. That's where I began studying alchemy. And then I did eventually, in a certain sense, get kicked out of the Garden of Eden. A true guru or teacher will always foster independence of his students, will never foster a dependence on the teacher. And so eventually all true teachers send their students out into the world to disseminate and to propagate the wisdom of what they've learned. So I did eventually, in 1987, left that group there, and was then in the throes of my divorce, actually, in the days after my separation from my wife and then my two young children. I was introduced to this idea, or reintroduced really, to the idea of visionary maps, vortexes, and the landscape geometries. And it was clear one chapter of my life was closing, my marriage was closing, and this other gift, the next chapter of my life, was kind of dropped in my lap, and that was the study of sacred places. Geomancy, to me, is a subset of alchemy. Alchemy is typically, in an oversimplified form, is thought of as working to transform lead into gold. But my teacher, Father Andre, made clear that alchemy is really about the perfection of the human body and of the psyche, striving for physical immortality and ascension. And geomancy then is a subset of alchemy, geo meaning earth, mancy meaning magic. So earth magic is very much a kind of alchemy. Pretty much all the principles of alchemy apply in geomancy. And so I focused on geomancy, and that makes a very nice, let's say, opening point or entry point into a conversation about alchemy.
Yeah, it's funny because you keep answering my questions in the order that I'm about to ask them. So the enchanting stranger was not paranormal or alien, but it was a human, and you said it was a priest?
Well, this was a being who used the name Father Andre.
Oh, okay.
He is clear that I asked him, why do you come through a channel? Why don't you come, if you can manifest a body, why don't you come to people in that way? And he said, well, sometimes I do. I like to come in disguise. Sometimes I'll, come in the disguise of, somebody who, like a beggar on the street. And he says, I came to you, and you'll remember when I did. And then it did all kind of come together, and I realized, well, this being, Ascended Master, using the name Father Andre, had come to visit me and essentially set up the next several steps in the process for me to then come study with him through a channel in Austin, Texas. There's more details I'm kind of glossing over, but I'm working on writing a story based on that called Paranormal Vortex.
Nice. So, how did you come to be the Vortex Detective?
Well, I was, as I say, just in the throes of my separation from my wife. My children were both young at that point, and I essentially didn't know where to go next. And I thought, I'll go visit my friends Lawrence and Galadriel. They have a little place at the time. This was in just south of the Oregon line in California, Northern California. So I'll go visit Lawrence and Galadriel. And as I was staying there, I was still crying every day, and in my grief, they had another house guest as well, and her name was Telia, and she was due in San Francisco to take a flight out of San Francisco, and I didn't really have any direction or anything better to do. I said, well, I'll drive you to San Francisco. That's kind of my hometown. And she said, well, is Lake Tahoe on the way? And remembering that we were in the area of Mount Shasta. Yes, I want to point out, Northern California, Mount Shasta is the landmark, the sacred mountain in the area. She said, well, is Tahoe on the way to San Francisco? I said, well, it's not really on the way, but it's one of my favorite places in the world. I'll be happy to take you to Lake Tahoe on the way to San Francisco. Well, then my host, Galadriel, she said, well, did you know that Mount Shasta is connected to Lake Tahoe? I said, no, I've got no idea. So she went to her bookshelf. She pulled a book off the shelf. It wasn't an officially published book. It was just like a photocopied thing that had been bound by hand. And that was a book called Triangles from Mountains, and it was authored under a pen name. It said, by Katrina. And so I looked at that map. It showed that the Grand Tetons, in fact, are the center of a circle of 19 mountains and bodies of water, which includes Shasta and Tahoe. Every one of these 19 mountains and bodies of water is the largest mountain or body of water in its region. And just knowing the center of the circle as the Tetons and a point on the edge of the circle, Shasta and or Tahoe, you can actually take a compass of the sort that's used to draw a circle around the Grand Tetons, find a map, draw a circle around. You'll find that there's a nearly perfect circle of 19 mountains and bodies of water. It includes, Three Sisters, Rainier, actually includes Sedona, Lake Mead. There's some halfway points that are significant. Crater Lake in Oregon, the only national park in Oregon. Mono Lake right there by Yosemite Valley. So it's this exquisite landform. So I looked at that map and just something clicked in my head at that point, and I took it on board. And I've been researching vortexes ever since. It's been more than 30 years now. But it didn't happen quite that fast. What happened was that I did end up going on a drive to Tahoe, and in fact onto the Grand Tetons. And when I got home from that journey, that pilgrimage, there was actually a letter waiting for me in the mailbox from a woman named Dorothy Leon. And Dorothy Leon had been referred to me by a friend of hers whom I did not even know. So Dorothy said, well, my friend Clarion Chandler said I should contact you. She said you're a publisher, which at the time I was not really a publisher. I'd been working in publishing all my life. But Dorothy asked me, she said, I've written this book. It's called Saint Germain's Mystical Quest for Democracy. I thought, well, that sounds wonderful. And I began reading her manuscript that she had submitted. At the beginning of that letter, it actually said that Dorothy had written a number of other books. One of those was under the pen name Katrina, called Triangle from Mountains. So having gone on a pilgrimage based on that book, when I got home, the author, Dorothy Leon, actually contacted me, asking me to publish another one of her books. I said, I'm not really a publisher, but would you permit me to publish your map? And so I took essentially one page out of Triangles from Mountains, this map of what she called the wheel with 19 spokes. And I published that. And at the same time then, I ended up contacting Beth Hagins. And some of your listeners may know of Beth Hagins and Bill Becker because they developed a map called the Earth Star Globe. It's been featured in a number of books. You might have even seen it on, let's say, Ancient Aliens. It's a world map that folds up into globe. It shows the natural geometry of the planet and also the geometric relationship between the Great Pyramids, Easter Island, Bermuda Triangle. Ancient monuments all over the world seem to have been built according to the same geometric plan. So that's called the Earth Star Globe. So that was going out of print, and so I asked Beth if I might reprint that. So I ended up publishing both the Earth Star map and what I came to call the Earth Star North America map, showing the wheel with 19 spokes around the Grand Tetons. So having published these two visionary geometric maps showing the geometric relationship of sacred places, then people began to contact me with all of their questions and stories about vortexes and everything else. So I became kind of a hub of information about visionary maps. And on my website, vortexmaps.com, I've done my best to compile, I think, nearly 100 visionary and geometric maps of various sorts, and to present those in as neutral a form as I can. Every different vortex researcher comes to the subject from a different angle. I gave you a little bit of how I came to the subject of vortex maps, but every researcher, some have paranormal experiences at a vortex. Some are perhaps studying vortexes. For example, my friend Nick Nelson studying vortexes because he believes they may hold the key to essentially free energy, to building a magnetic motor, so to speak. So everybody comes to the study from a different angle, and I've compiled essentially as a neutral observer, many different researchers, and I've done some original vortex research myself, of course.
Nice. Well, Dan, on that note, we got to.
Of course.
And you guys, on break, you can check out Dan at www.danshaw.com, and we'll be back to talk about vortexes here in just 1 second. You guys don't go anywhere.
Heading to Vancouver and looking for some great nightlife? The Moose Vancouver is the place to be. Catch a game on one of the big screens, or just come rock out to your favorite 80s and 90s hair bands. Great food starting at $6.95. The Moose Vancouver is open until 2 a.m. nightly. It's easy to find near the corner of Nelson and Granville. The Moose Vancouver is the official rocking bar of Spaced Out Radio.
Find your escape where time has no limits. It's about living today and cherishing the heritage of yesterday. A spirit of adventure for what is new, with the nostalgia of the past. Your timepiece is a reflection of who you are. Life surrounded by beauty from the world around us to the soul within. EscapeWatches.com. There is no time like the present to enjoy your escape. Use promo code SMF2017 for your 20% discount today.
Coming September 28th to the 30th, it's our first annual Caribou Paracon, put on by Spaced Out Radio and the Canadian Society of Questers. 3 days of paranormal, supernatural, and spiritual knowledge in the beautiful 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia. Tickets are $150 Canadian for the event, being held at the Spruce Hills Resort and Spa. Come watch our featured speaker, Grant Cameron, along with Lorian Fenton, David Weatherly, Ross Allison, and more. The Caribou Paracon, celebrating everything paranormal.
Are you tired of being blocked, shadow banned, or placed in jail for simply posting your thoughts on social media? Social Media Freedom can take care of that for you. Social Media Freedom is the newest and one of the best free new apps that allows you the freedom to post what you want when you want. It takes seconds to download from your app store. Come join the tribe at Social Media Freedom. It's time to set yourself free.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now. The Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
We're bringing scientific thought to the paranormal. Hi there, this is Spaced Out Radio scientist Chris Cogswell. Join me, Chris Zuger, and Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month, where we break down the who from the woo when it comes to everything paranormal. We'll investigate and try to bring sensible answers to those straight and sometimes outlandish questions people have. Hey, not everything has an answer, but we'll do our best. Listen in to Reality Paranormal only on Spaced Out Radio.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com.
When it comes to the news, we look for the stories that the mainstream won't cover. Welcome to Spaced Out Radio's The Encounter. This is News Director Everett Thiemer. The Encounter is about the weird and strange stories that occur daily, and we scour the world looking to bring them to you. You can hear me with Dave Scott every Monday through Friday in our Encounter news segment. Read us online at spacedoutradio.com or check us out and give our Facebook page a like at SOR The Encounter. So come give The Encounter a read.
Are you an experiencer? Have you had run-ins with strange creatures you can't explain? ETs, Dogman, Bigfoot, werewolves? They're enough to scare the daylights out of anyone. Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski from your Cop. And on the last Monday of every month, you can listen to me and the host, Dave Scott, talk about the weird and the strange being reported on Spaced Out Radio. I'm going to bring my investigations and sources, you bring your experiences, and we'll figure out the rest together. Strange Days on Spaced Out Radio. Come tune us in at spacedoutradio.com.
You hear footsteps in the empty room above you. Don't be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. Reach for Spirit Storybox, the iPhone app the Huffington Post UK called the only ghost hunting app you will ever need. Spirit Storybox. The spirits are telling their stories. Are you listening?
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
Looking for nighttime adventure? Old school radio that delves into everything out of the norm? Then check us out at Spaced Out Radio. This is Dave Scott. Every Monday through Friday, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, we're going to take you on a wild ride ranging from conspiracies to true crime and every ghost, alien, and Sasquatch story in between. We're always live, and we're always interactive with you. So join us at spacedoutradio.com, where together, we own the night.
Find yourself constantly looking up in the sky, looking for answers? Have you had extraterrestrial contact? Are you an abductee? Looking for answers to your experiences? Hi there, I'm R. Keith Andrews, Spaced Out Radio's resident ET expert. Join me live the first Friday of every month, where I take questions from the Spaced Out Radio chat room and help you understand those from the far-off world. It's 2 hours of knowledge every experiencer should listen to. Hope to see you there.
Tonight's show and topic of discussion do not necessarily reflect the opinion of Spaced Out Radio, SOR Media, or its hosts. Listener discretion is advised. It's hour number 3 of Spaced Out Sunday with host Tessa Nicole Thomas. Follow Tessa on Twitter at TessaTNT. Our website is spacedoutradio.com. Now back to the Rocky Mountains. Here's Tessa.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me tonight on spacedoutradio.com. We are with Dan Shaw, and we are talking Vortexes. Dan, welcome back, and thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for inviting me.
So, my next question, what causes a vortex or portal?
Okay, well, I would say it is still a mystery. I don't claim to have all the answers. I'm fascinated by anything I don't fully understand. And, well, I have some theories, for sure. I thought, well, the simplest solution, what might cause a vortex, might be electricity and magnetism. After all, the Earth is electric and magnetic, and so are the cells of our body, and so is our brain. And by vortex, to define the term, I would say we're talking about a paranormal vortex. Yes, ordinarily a vortex is like any spinning thing, like a whirlwind or a whirlpool, but obviously we're talking about something a little different. a paranormal vortex is a place that seems to contribute to paranormal experiences. So, broadly, I'm interested in paranormal experiences very broadly, but I have to focus down. So I'm at places that are somehow involved in paranormal experiences. So for me, the simplest place to look seemed to be the electromagnetic field. And turns out that that's a pretty complex equation. I could go and get a geography degree so I could better understand and explain what's going on, vortexes in the electromagnetic field of the Earth, but I'm not a geophysicist. But there are a couple dozen different factors that contribute to the electromagnetic field wherever you are. Nowhere on Earth is the electromagnetic field uniform or still. Everywhere the electromagnetic field varies, and it's dynamic. It's always in flux. The sun is one of the primary drivers of the electromagnetic field on Earth. The sun goes through various cycles. There's an 11-year cycle, there's a 22-year cycle, and there are short-term storms, perturbations of the sun that influence the electromagnetic field on Earth. So that's one of the contributors to the electromagnetic field. The Earth has a solid part of the core and a molten part of the core of the Earth underneath the mantle. That molten part is actually vortexing, and the solid part of the core of the Earth is actually rotating at a different speed than the crust of the Earth. So you've got a very dynamic, kind of almost like a washing machine effect going on with the iron, the magma inside the Earth. So that's another contributor to the electromagnetic field we experience on the surface. Of course, there's surface features that we see that also contribute to the field, and then there's ore and mineral deposits. The air is highly electric. The Earth is electric for a number of reasons. The soil itself is full of moisture and minerals, and if you take a couple of electrodes, you can actually put them in the Earth. You can measure the Earth's conductivity and resistivity. So the Earth itself is full of electricity and magnetism, and I'll mention quartz crystals. Quartz is one of the most abundant minerals in the Earth, silicon dioxide, and it is in crystalline form. It's electric. It generates under pressure. Quartz crystal generates a kind of electricity called piezoelectricity. And of course, underneath the ground, quartz crystal is under pressure. And so as the moon orbits around the Earth, and we have ocean tides, there's also land tides. Actually, there's weight in the oceans that it actually deforms the Earth. So daily, as the moon rotates around the Earth, we get these cycles of compression on the tectonic plates, the plates of the crust of the Earth. There's this cycle of pressure and release. So there's a cycle of piezoelectricity in the Earth. And then even seawater is electric. If you look at a column of seawater, if you just plucked a column of seawater out of the ocean, you'd see that at different layers, there's different currents of seawater, different temperature, density, and salinity. And where you have these ocean currents, salt water, it does carry electricity, yes, and so you have a very complex pattern of, say, for example, at the Bermuda Triangle. What's causing the phenomena at the Bermuda Triangle? It could be all these different layers of seawater, these currents of seawater interacting, each of them with their own kind of electrical potential. And there's also a lot more going on at the Bermuda Triangle. And so in total, there's a couple dozen different contributors to the electric-magnetic field wherever you are. So that's where I go first in looking for some cause for these paranormal places I call vortexes. But there are any number of other kinds of factors that may contribute to vortexes. For example, there are acoustic frequencies. You can look at the whole electromagnetic spectrum, color, sound, and there's seismic waves going through the earth, actually, like earthquake waves, seismic waves going through the earth. There's a couple of different kinds of those. So there's a most obvious level, could look at electricity and magnetism, but then there's other kinds of radiations, energies, and these are kind of gross physical forces. And then, of course, there's finer, more subtle physical forces that you might call etheric forces. These are also possible contributors to the paranormal vortex. And people sometimes ask me, well, are vortexes where two ley lines cross? So I can answer that question before you ask it, perhaps.
Okay.
People are sometimes familiar with the idea of ley lines as being lines of Earth energy. Excuse me. The term originates from a researcher in England who observed rifle straight alignments between ancient settlements, standing stone, and the like. So there's these straight lines. He didn't associate them with Earth energies as we do today exactly. He was more interested in trading routes and such. But there are also, let's say, sinuous, snake-like lines of Earth energies, yes? So lays in its narrow sense refers to these arrow straight kind of lines of energy. Where lines of energy cross, you might say you get a vortex. Now, in England, where roads cross, you find a roundabout, a circle, yes? And at those where those roads cross, at the crossroads, you'd often find a marker and or a monument or perhaps a church. This is where people would gather. There might be some kind of a shrine. And in most traditions, people would circle around that shrine in a clockwise fashion. And think about it, in the States, we drive on the right side of the road where we have a roundabout. Since we wouldn't be satisfied doing, as colonists, we wouldn't want to do it the British way, right? So we're driving on the right side of the road. But in England, they drive on the left side of the road. They approach a roundabout. They circle around counterclockwise. And that is the way that traditionally you would circle around a church if there were the 12 stations of the cross for pilgrims to visit. The 12 stations of the cross being part of the story of Jesus, yes. The pilgrims would come in and they would visit those 12 stations around the edges of the church in a clockwise fashion. So the word circle actually derives from the word kirk, which means church. So there's a close relationship between circles and churches, and those crossroads where people traditionally would go around clockwise. The opposite direction, counterclockwise, that's traditionally associated with actually siege, meaning like siege of a fort or a castle. And in the Bible, you'll read about Jericho, and Joshua blew his horn, the walls of Jericho came tumbling down. But before they did, they circled around Jericho counterclockwise 7 times. So it's almost as though when you circle clockwise, you're enhancing the vortex power. When you circle counterclockwise, it's almost like you're unzipping or undoing whatever power is built up. Similarly, in the tradition of the Quran, in the Islamic tradition, Muhammad came to Mecca and he circled it 7 times, and he he circled it 7 times in order to essentially overthrow Mecca at the time. Yes, he circled in this counterclockwise fashion, the siege-wise, or in the pagan tradition, that direction is actually called Widdershins. And so today, to emulate how Muhammad circled around Mecca during the Hajj, during the pilgrimage, in the Islamic tradition, pilgrims circle around the Kaaba. There's a cubical black box, essentially, at the center of the sacred temple at Mecca, where Muslims continue that tradition of circling around counterclockwise. And you can imagine with millions of pilgrims circling counterclockwise around that sacred stone, the Kaaba stone, that's got to create a tremendous vortex energy. So that was, I guess, the long answer for what's a vortex and how does it associate with waves.
Okay, so how would one know when they are approaching or have found a vortex?
Oh, great. Okay, I'm glad you give me a chance to answer that. Yeah, I definitely draw me back to the basics here. Different people sense vortexes in different ways. And again, I'm going to suggest vortexes are everywhere where you will find an anomaly in the electromagnetic field. So that's pretty much everywhere. Almost nowhere is the electromagnetic field uniform. Like there's a hypothetical kind of average electromagnetic field, but in reality that really doesn't exist anywhere. I mean, imagine you're out in like the Great Salt where there's no features on the surface and the electromagnetic field seems very uniform. What are you going to experience out there in the Great Salt Flats in terms of vortexes? Well, you're still going to be under the influence of the sun, of that molten core of the earth, doing its vortexing. You're maybe not going to see anything on the surface, but the air is going to be electric. Actually, in the desert, you have a hot, dry air. It's going to be full of positive electrical ions. Conversely, around a waterfall or after a thunderstorm, you're going to find a lot of negative ions in the air. People are familiar with those because you tend to feel very good in a negative ion environment. In a positive ion environment, what happens is people feel upset, they feel angry, they get into fights, they have accidents. More people show up in emergency rooms where there's that hot, dry wind. So even the wind can be a kind of a vortex. It's very much associated with feng shui, and feng shui being, you know, a term for this Asian form of geomancy. But you could use feng shui in kind of a more general sense to kind of indicate geomancy in general. So as you point, it may be the interface between, let's say, a meadow and a mountain, or at the interface between the shore and the ocean, somewhere where there's a shift in the electromagnetic energy, and we're going to feel that in our cells. Birds, bees, and fish all have a magnetic sense that they use to navigate, to migrate around Earth's magnetic field, and it's very likely, in my experience, it is true that people also have a magnetic sense. In our brains, every cell of our brain has a minute amount of a magnet mineral called magnetite. And in the front part of your skull, in your sinuses and third eye area, for our paranormal listeners, you've got even greater amounts of magnetite. So that's a possible mechanism how we could also have a magnetic sense. So different people feel it in different ways. As you move in to an area, usually as you cross a kind of an interface between one kind of energy and another, you're very likely to feel some kind of sensation. Different people feel it in different ways. I tend to get a kind of a tingling in my third eye, in my face, jaw, nose, that kind of thing. Some people will feel it in their stomach, some in their head. Some people will use a device of some sort in order to sense that and help them sense that energy. Some people might use dowsing rods Yes, people are often familiar with like water witching, using a pair of bent metal rods to locate underground water. That's a kind of a vortex. And some people might even just use a forked stick as a way of tuning in to the subtle or even subconscious feelings in their own body. Other people might use a pendulum of some sort in order to douse those energies. So you can use a device in order to sense these vortex energies. And there's a kind of dowsing actually called deviceless dowsing, where you're just using your own body. So different people will sense it in different ways. This changes in the electromagnetic field cannot but help affect the electromagnetic cells in our body and in our brain. I say that we're not separate, and this is a basic principle of alchemy, is that there is no separation. None whatsoever. Separation really is part of the illusion of our own perception, so that the relationship that we have with the vortex is not like a handshake relationship at a distance. No, it's actually a relationship of unity. Our electromagnetic field, our aura, is totally immersed in a churning ocean of electricity and magnetism. So as we become more aware of the possibility that the place may be affecting our physiology, may be affecting our cells in our brain, then we become more sensitive to that. We start noticing it more. And as we move from one kind of electric or magnetic or energetic field, as we move through these fields from one to another, it can act as kind of an activation, a chakra activation or an initiatory pilgrimage. And we often find that different vortexes vibrate at different frequencies and activate different chakras. The chakras are essentially wheels of energy within our body. They're actually like vortexes in our body. And if you were to say to visit a waterfall, that might feel really great. There'd be a lot of negative ions in the air. That would have an influence on you. The sound of the waterfall turns out to be profound in that there's a very rich mix of frequencies. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a white noise, but there'll be kind of a dominant frequency depending on where you are standing and which direction you're facing relative to the waterfall. It'll actually change as you move around the waterfall. The frequency, the dominant frequency might change, and you might feel the sound of the waterfall influencing any chakra or different chakras as you change your orientation to the waterfall. Also, you'll be getting slightly different frequencies in each ear, and the slightly different frequencies have the ability of creating actually a third frequency. You actually get like a 1 + 1 is 3. It's sometimes called binaural beats, meaning binaural meaning in both ears, yes? And there's certain frequencies that are below the frequency of human hearing. When you get down into those very low frequencies of a couple cycles a second, 5 cycles per second, 10 cycles per second, sometimes called hertz, 15 cycles per second. Those aren't audible frequencies. Those are not in the range that humans can hear. But those frequencies can be created by the interaction of two other frequencies that are very close. So you're hearing a lot of different frequencies, slightly different frequencies in each ear. Those are creating a third frequency that's actually helping to entrain your brain into the more meditative states. The brain states, the different frequencies are often referred to by the Greek letters, alpha, beta, delta, theta. So those brain frequencies can actually be induced. Your brain can actually be entrained into these expanded states by the interaction of a couple sounds, and so the waterfall can contribute to that. So that's some of the kinds of experiences that might be generated by a couple different types of vibrations at a couple different kinds of vortexes.
Nice. That's very interesting. We had a question in the chat room from John Doerr, and he's asking, what can a natural vortex be used for, and do you have any personal experiences with them?
Yes, thank you for asking. I think it's a very close analogy to think of these vortex points as essentially like acupuncture points on the earth. Most people are familiar with Chinese medicine, acupuncture, at least to the extent that our body has some subtle channels of energy, the acupuncture meridians. Along those meridians, there are certain points that can be stimulated with a needle, with puncture, acupuncture, or pressure, acupressure, or even color or sound can be used to stimulate those points. That's the human body. Another principle of alchemy is that the microcosm reflects the macrocosm. In other words, our bodies reflect the entire universe. It's almost as though we're all made in God's image. Yes, again, the microcosm reflects the macrocosm. So you can think of the ley lines and the vortexes as being very much analogous to the acupuncture meridians and points. So following through that analogy, by the more we understand how the natural world works, the better we're able to work with those natural forces. So if you went to an acupuncturist, they might find that some of your meridians are maybe overstimulated, some are understimulated, and they could apply needles or pressure, whatever it is, in proper area to help strengthen or tonify certain meridians. So the same would be true with earth energies. People are sensitive to these energies, may be able to sense that certain lines of energy are out of balance, whatever it might be, and to then, in effect, intervene to act as a change agent to help balance the earth energies. So this is a good place for me to suggest that, I have an elevator pitch in a sense. One of my fundamental principles is this: there's an infinite amount of energy available everywhere, all the time, for our physical healing, for our psychic opening, and for harmonizing the planet. So if you will locate a place nearby you, it doesn't have to be the Bermuda Triangle. You'll be able to find a place near you where there's energy that you will find is very soothing, comforting, healing. If you will go there with the intention of developing your psychic ability, these places can be very supportive to developing your psychic abilities. You can go there with the intention of developing your telepathy or even teleportation or what I call God powers, these psychic abilities. So you can locate a vortex point. It will help you to develop your psychic abilities. And conversely, you can also help balance the energies of the planet where we have intervened and we've been mining minerals, or we've been cutting highways or drilling oil or whatever we're doing. It can cause these energies to be out of balance, and we can rebalance those energies when we understand, when we can sense them and understand how to work with them. I hope that answers your question, or begins to answer your question.
Yeah, I hope that helps. So, what is the difference between a vortex and a portal?
Mm-hmm. Well, many researchers believe and experience that these points are places, well, you can sometimes, I like to refer to them as islands of infinity. But these vortexes are sacred places where, kind of like on Halloween, or the Day of the Dead, where our ancestors are close at hand, let's say, vortexes are places where the veil between worlds is thin, between our physical world and the world of spirits. And again, there really is no other side. It's all one. There's no separation. But, language is limited. We have to use some words to suggest the greater reality. The Tao that can be spoken is not the true Tao. Yes, you can't really encapsulate it. We can't really say the name of God. We can't define something that's really can't be defined. It's infinite. We can't define it. But we can suggest that these places are places where we can more easily travel into these other dimensions or into these spiritual realms. So some people definitely experience them as portals. It's, I say, common for people to seek cryptic creatures such as Bigfoot or Thunderbirds or elves, fairies, whatever it is, at vortexes. So, yes, portals between dimensions or between worlds, where the worlds really aren't separate.
So can a vortex or portal be free-floating, or are they always in a fixed state?
Oh, okay, lovely. I believe in experiences and experience that the Earth is a divine conscious being. Everything is divine. Nothing is separate from the divine. So these are places, I think, where we can really experience the divinity of the Earth. And just like ourselves, we're continuing to evolve. And I believe that the Earth grid is evolving from simpler to more complex forms. And so these, again, we're in a very dynamic electromagnetic environment, and the tectonic plates are continuously moving, and yet there does seem to be some underlying geometric structure that is stable. And from a scientific standpoint, you can look at the Hawaiian Islands. These are a pretty interesting example in that Hawaiian Islands are formed by a stable hotspot in the Earth's core underneath the crust. There's an oceanic crust. It's moving across a stable hotspot where the upwelling magma is creating a chain of islands. And the Hawaiian Islands are at 19.5 degrees latitude. Now, some of your listeners will be familiar with the work of Richard Hoagland. Richard Hoagland has popularized the idea that there's a tetrahedral geometry to Mars, actually. Cydonia Mars, where there's this architecture on Mars, the face on Mars, not just the face, but other features as well, that's at 19.5 degrees north. 19.5 is a point in a globe where if you take one of the simplest geometric shapes possible, the tetrahedron, and you inscribe it into the globe with one point at the North Pole, the other points of the tetrahedron will come out at 19.5 degrees south. If you flip it over, one point of the tetrahedron at the South Pole, the other points will touch the Earth, the surface at 19.5 degrees north. The tetrahedron, again, it's a pyramid-like structure. It's essentially, instead of a pyramid has a square base, the tetrahedron is 4 equilateral triangles. So it's like a pyramid with a triangular base, yes? So that 19.5 degrees latitude reflects the tetrahedral geometry. All right, so when you look at the tetrahedron, and some of your listeners will be familiar with the Merkaba work popularized by Grunvalo Melchizedek, where people are visualizing two interpenetrating tetrahedra, essentially a 3D version of the Star of David, the Jewish star, as a way of the people are studying the Flower of Life work by Grunvalo. They may be visualizing two interpenetrating tetrahedra rotating in different directions at a certain speed, etc. So that tetrahedral geometry is very interesting. It's reflected on Cydonia, on Mars at Cydonia. It's reflected on Earth at the Hawaiian Islands. There's a number of features on Earth. The storm on Jupiter. There's a red spot on Jupiter. It's quite large. Jupiter's a gaseous planet, right? There's that stable kind of storm, the eye on Jupiter. Correct me if I'm wrong here. It's getting a little late.
Yeah,
that's at 19.5 degrees. So we see that geometry reflected on not just Earth, but also other planets as well. I wonder if you could repeat the question at this point.
I believe it was, can a vortex or portal be free-floating, or are they always in a fixed place?
Thank you. Okay, so I would say that the vortexes are, some of them stable, some of them evolving, and I would think also shifting. So, yeah, thanks for repeating the question there. I went a little far afield.
Oh, no worries. We had another question from the chat room, and this one comes from Julian, and he's asking, how can you open a vortex or portal? Is that possible?
Okay, well, it certainly is possible. Some people want to open these portals. Other people might want to close them, actually. But I tend to be very shy, let's say hesitant to intervene. Unless you really do have psychic sight, you really know what you're doing, you might not want to mess with this stuff. Different people have different techniques for certain. If you, let's say you Google the word grid work as one word, let's say, you're going to end up with a lot of people who are defining themselves as grid workers, and they may be using any technique imaginable. It might be through dancing barefoot on the earth, perhaps walking in circles, or having groups of people walking in counter-rotating circles, prayer, celebration, drumming, meditation, visualization. Some people are they call it gifting sacred places using either crystals or sometimes a synthetic kind of a material called organite, which is often a layering of materials with different kinds of electrical properties. People are creating, they're maybe using shards, let's say, of aluminum encased in like a resin and maybe in a little shape of a cupcake, something like that. There's all kinds of different tools and techniques that people might use, just as in acupuncture you might use those needles, or you might use cupping or amoxibustion, which is almost like a little cigar of burning herbs. So there's really almost an infinite number of techniques for working with these energies, and of course it varies from culture to culture.
So, we have another question here in the chat room. Let me pull it up here real quick. Craig is wondering, what will the major vortex in Banff, Alberta, will it give him exasperate? I'm not sure what he's trying to say there.
That's okay. Will it give him... Is there the rest of the sentence there?
Will it give me exacerbate? And I'm not understanding that one. Are you?
Well, I can maybe take a stab at that.
Okay.
What he's referring to, I think, is that he's taken a look at that wheel with 19 spokes around the Grand Tetons. And Lake Louise in Banff is one of those 19 points around the Grand Tetons. The Grand Tetons and Mount Shasta and Lake Louise are all purported to be retreats of the Ascended Masters. And there was a series of books, the Green Books, by a fellow named Guy Ballard, who was at one time based in Mount Shasta. In the very beginning of those Green Books, it mentions that the retreats of the Masters are in Shasta, Tetons, and Lake Louise. So that must have been 50, 60 years ago or more. Right in the first couple of pages of those Green Books by Guy Ballard, you get a clue right there, because having one point at the center, one point at the edge, actually he gives 2 points. That implies that entire circle there. So the Earth-Star North America map, as I call it, the wheel with 19 spokes around Grand Tetons, that does indicate that Lake Louise is one of these vortex points, which essentially at any of these 19 points around the Grand Tetons, you have direct access to all of them. Numerologically, the number 19 is very interesting. Dorothy Leon, who first saw this pattern, was a student of numerology, says she felt that the 19, the meaning of the 19 ultimately meant that it was all one. So whether you're at Lake Louise or at Mount Shasta, wherever you are, knowing that this pattern exists can help orient you, connect you to the entire pattern. Standing at Mount Shasta, I can essentially face the Grand Tetons and feel connected to all the points around the circle. And those points, if you are in a happy mood, you may feel ecstatic and blissful. But if you're in an unhappy mood, and there's that word, it could exacerbate that and make that even more dreadful. So these points have an ability to enhance our psychic abilities, our emotions, etc. And researchers such as Peter Shampoo, who wrote the book Gaia Matrix, feels that these ley lines, and you could say vortexes as well, essentially anchor and reinforce and recreate certain specific emotions and experiences, so that Peter Shampoo identifies a series of points, including Washington, D.C., which he calls the Empire Ley, because they all seem to have to do with empire. And then there's a Trail of Tears ley line that all have to do with the Trail of Tears and associated events. The Earth-Star Globe, I'll mention now. The geometry of the Earth-Star Globe shows a connection between Jerusalem, which is a center of some great world religions, yes, Judaism and Islam, and Mecca and Rome. So what you see when you look at the Earth-Star Globe, you actually see a geometry between these 3 points, which are central to some of the world's great religions. And also looking at that pattern of the Earth-Star Globe, which is made up of 30 diamonds, you'll notice that it very closely resembles what's known as the Tree of Life in Jewish mysticism or Kabbalah. There's a geometric pattern. It's essentially, to oversimplify, it's a pattern of dots, often 10, sometimes more, 10 dots connected by lines or paths. So the Kabbalistic tree of life overlays very neatly over Rome, Jerusalem, and Mecca, and over the Earth grid.
It's very interesting how it all works. We have another question here from Robin, and he's asking, is there a ley line or vortex or both at the Bermuda Triangle?
Mm-hmm. The Bermuda Triangle is one of these geometric points around the Earth. When you take a look at the Earth, what you find is that there's a pattern of points that corresponds with now a couple of more complex geometric shapes, more complex than the tetrahedron. You have the tetrahedron as being one of these Platonic solids named after Plato. There's 5 geometric shapes where all the sides are the same length and all the angles are the same. So you have the tetrahedron, the cube, the octahedron, the icosahedron, and the dodecahedron. All right? Now the tetrahedron, I already mentioned, the 2 interpenetrating tetrahedra, kind of a 3D Jewish star. The tetrahedra is a dual of itself. In other words, you can pair 2 tetrahedra very perfectly. The icosahedron and the dodecahedron are also duals. In other words, the icosahedron has points where the dodecahedron has faces. The 2 of those nest perfectly within each other. When you combine the icosahedron and the dodecahedron, then you end up with the Earth grid as we know it today. The Earth grid is made up of a combination, the icosahedron, the dodecahedron. When you include the North and South Pole, that gives you 62 points, okay? We're headed towards the Bermuda Triangle now. The Bermuda Triangle was first identified as being like the biovortex by a guy named Ivan Sanderson. He was looking at clusters of disappearances around the world. That's how he identified the Bermuda Triangle. He found that there were a number of other points where there were clusters of disappearances of ships, of planes, of rescue missions, right? And so the Bermuda Triangle is one of a number of geometric points around the Earth. People might have heard of the Devil's Sea near Japan, etc. So there's a certain geometry between these vortex points around the world. And at the Bermuda Triangle, there's any number of unusual factors. It's almost the perfect storm coming together. For example, at the Bermuda Triangle, the tectonic plate there, the oceanic plate, is in effect buckling. The plate is being pushed up at the center, and when you look into it, you'll find that scientists have no agreed-upon explanation about why that plate would be essentially being pushed up at the center, buckling. And as I mentioned, where you have pressure on the tectonic plates and where you have quartz crystal underground, yes, you're going to have a fluctuating electricity, fluctuating electromagnetic field. Bermuda Triangle is going to have these various currents of seawater that have interacting electrical fields. Right above the level of the ocean where the waves are breaking, you're going to have a lot of salt in the air. That air is going to be very electrical. And again, there's a couple dozen factors contributing to the electromagnetic field. Wherever you are at the Bermuda Triangle, you'll find that on the seafloor, there are little bacteria that are magnetic in nature in massive amounts. They die, they fall to the bottom of the ocean, these little magnetic bacteria, and they actually accumulate in such massive amounts that in some place they do create a statistically significant, a measurable amount of contribution to the magnetic field. So the picture of the magnetic field at any place on the Earth is very complex. The Bermuda Triangle, there's also some government involvement. You'll often find some kind of government involvement at these vortex points. One of the vortex points, one of the Earth grid points, is in Baja, Mexico, near Sonoita. There's a place called Cerro Cubabay, and that point, there's a very large array. That's a technical term, a VLA, very large array of satellite dishes. We've been talking about how these vortexes, well, we didn't really mention. Vortexes, you might think of these as points that broadcast or receive. So having satellite array there is very apropos. So very often there's government involvement, some kind of military base, or maybe it's a nuclear facility, a particle accelerator. There's a pretty high correspondence between vortex points and military involvement. At the Bermuda Triangle, there's a spot there where the government is actually working to influence the ionosphere. Above the Earth, there's an electrically charged layer called the ionosphere, and the government finds that they can direct radio waves, various things at the ionosphere as a way of heating the ionosphere and manipulating radio signals in the ionosphere, because their radio signals tend to bounce off the ionosphere. And, of course, we're working on geoengineering and controlling the weather. This is no longer just some kind of whisper conspiracy theory, but it's, generally recognized by governments and such, geoengineering. And so there's actually a military base at the Bermuda Triangle where they're doing that kind of broadcasting energy, heating up the ionosphere. So there's definitely a lot of things going on at the Bermuda Triangle. I hope that answers your question, at least in part.
Indeed, yeah. It's very in-depth and interesting, and sometimes hard for some people to grasp. But so we have a question from Dawn, and she is asking, has anyone had visual confirmation of a vortex or possibly interaction with one? Also, can it be used as a doorway if it is a thinning of realms, so to speak? Could someone pass through one?
For sure. People have reported various kinds of time slips, lost time, that kind of thing at vortexes. Some people have the ability to see auras. Some people are seeing these vortex energies and the ley lines. They look different to different people. I've had people ask me, so what do the ley lines look like to you? Do they look like, are they colorful? Are they triangular? What do they look like? And they're kind of disappointed to hear that I don't quite have that psychic kind of vision, especially because if they're looking for confirmation of what they're seeing. Yes. So, some people are able to visually see it. As I mentioned, different people sense them in different ways. You can dowse for them, and people do find that they're able to actually measure how the energy lines expand and contract at different times of the year or at different places. Vortexes can be great places to practice teleportation. And if you wanted to practice teleportation, what you might do is you would choose an energetic spot to sit and meditate, and an energetic spot where you wanted to teleport to. You might meditate on kind of both ends of the channel, so to speak. And you might have some success practicing your teleportation in that way, sitting in first one spot and the other, and tuning into that line of energy that connects them. At the Montana Vortex, we do get some fascinating photos pretty much every day. Hundreds of people coming through, taking photos. We get photos of orbs, which are balls of light, where each one has a distinct pattern to it. And when you take a couple pictures in a row, you can actually see them rotating, and we've seen them moving around people. Other times people get photos that show swirls of light, even if their camera is perfectly still. You can see some of these photos at my website, vortexmaps.com. And so sometimes people are able to catch different phenomena on camera, and some Bigfoot researchers have reported seeing Bigfoot turning into a ball of light, or footprints in the snow where the tracks just come to a point where they vanish. So it's, to my mind, very plausible that these places actually do function as portals between dimensions. Also, there seems to be a high correspondence, some researchers find, between UFO sightings and vortexes. Some years ago, there was an author named Bruce Cathie, Cathie, who was a pilot in New Zealand, and he had some UFO sightings and began marking on a map clusters of UFO sightings, and he identified actually a cubical grid where there were clusters of UFO sightings. If we think of the electromagnetic field of the Earth as being visible to birds and bees and fish, we might posit that these electromagnetic fields might also be either visible or at least sensible, in that if there were aliens, or however you might want to think of it, beings in UFOs, that they would be able to either see or somehow measure these electromagnetic fields, and where there's fluctuations in those, and they might be using those as waypoints, so to speak, so that you might find beings, orbs, UFOs navigating, as do birds and bees and fish, by the electromagnetic field.
Yeah, and she was also saying hers is just black and will move away if she walks towards it.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that's somebody who has direct experience of seeing vortex portals. Sounds like.
So have you heard of anyone that has spent an extended amount of time in a vortex? Like, would it be possible to camp in one? And if you did, what do you think might happen?
Well, I'm staying the summer at the Montana Vortex here. It's, I don't know, a piece of property, maybe a couple acres, right on the edge of the Flathead River. As the Flathead River comes out of Glacier National Park, and I'm actually camping there. A couple summers I've been living on the property there, and I wouldn't suggest that somebody necessarily build a house on a vortex. Might be something like magnets and a magnetic mattress. You might find it kind of overstimulating to use it every night. You might want to take some nights off. Yeah, so I did have somebody once contact me. They had a piece of property. They felt it was a vortex, and they'd built their house essentially on the summit. And they were definitely feeling it was overstimulating. And just from a subtle energy standpoint, or from you might say a feng shui standpoint, it's going to be tremendously exposed to the elements and windy on the summit. And you could think of a vortex maybe in that way, that it's going to be highly stimulating, maybe even overstimulating. You might not want to spend continuous amount of time on the vortex. I suggested to that person that they might build like a gazebo at a more sheltered place on the property, not on the summit, but below the summit, somewhere where the energy might be calmer. So certainly a lot of people are living on vortexes and they're just unawares. One of the principles of alchemy is that anything that has any potency at all, anything that has any power at all, can either heal or kill. It's a tool that can be used for good or ill. And certainly there's lots of researchers out there who are working with what's called geopathic energies. In other words, earth energies which are not good for your health. And there's any number of names for these lines of energy. There's Curry lines, Hartmann lines or grids, other names for these geopathic or unhealthful Earth energies. And you can certainly find grid workers like myself who are making intervention into situations like that. It's great to know if your bed is on one of these unhealthful lines, you might want to move your bed or sleep in another part of the house if that's the case. So these things are powerful. They can be very helpful and healing, but they can also be negative. They can be misused even. And these places may be powerful places for broadcasting energies of various sorts. Prayer, as well as, let's say, control frequencies. One way to say it. So, does that answer your question there? You might not want to spend too much time at a vortex point. You might get a little sunburn, so to speak.
So Tripp was asking, and I assume he's talking about the Montana vortex or any vortex, and he says it's a skeptical question, but can anyone bring a level and use it there without being harassed?
Okay, I love skeptical questions, and I'm leading towards the Montana vortex right now, and one of the phenomena you notice is that two people standing face to face, one person appears taller, a couple feet away from the other. As they switch places, the other one appears taller. And we do keep a lot of levels around. You'd be right to wonder, now, could this platform be totally level? And so we keep a level nearby. You can check the level of the thing. You can put a marble on the platform. People get this shrink and grow effect from every angle. It has nothing to do with any kind of ordinary optical illusion that we understand. And I do have a couple theories about why you would see this phenomenon we call the shrink and grow. And namely that, well, let's start here with refraction. When you put let's say, a flower into a vase of water, and you look at the stem of the flower, you can see that at the interface between the water and the air, the stem seems to break. It seems discontinuous. That's called refraction due to the different density of the water in the air and how light passes through that different density. Okay, so that's refraction. That's well understood. It may be that there's a similar thing happening at the vortex. It's actually possible that there's a distinct difference in the density of the air from one place to another. You could actually test that with a kind of photography using a laser called Schlerin photography. Using Schlerin photography, using a laser, you can actually photograph different density of different air. This is something I've not yet had the opportunity to put into practice at the Montana vortex to see if that's in fact the case. But if you visualize a vortex as a sphere, some people see it as a sphere of energy, then you can imagine that at the edge of this sphere, that edge would be essentially concave, like a lens. It would be bent like a lens. And so it would make some sense that looking at two people, each one standing on a different side of this lens-like or curved interface, that would create this optical effect where one looks bigger than the other. But as I say, the shrink and grow that you see at the Oregon vortex, the Montana vortex, the Santa Cruz mystery spot, you'll see it demonstrated at all these different genuine vortexes that are open as tourist attractions. That shrink and grow cannot be debunked so far as I know. I would quit my job if that were the case. I wouldn't be leading tours at the Montana vortex if it were that easily explained. I would move on to something I find more mysterious and more interesting to me. So certainly you can use a level there. When you bring a magnetic compass into the vortex, it may behave strangely. We've seen, on occasion, we've seen the compass spin We've seen that the needle might seem to change over time. And I'll also point out that when you use a magnetic compass, it comes in essentially a flat case, and you're looking at one vector of the magnetic field. You're essentially looking at the y vector of the magnetic field. In other words, your needle is going to point towards magnetic north. Yes? However, you can also get a magnetic dip needle, and that's like a compass that spins freely in the x and y axis. It's on a gimbal or two, and that way that allows you to see the magnetic dip. In other words, the magnetic needle will point up or down as well as to magnetic north, because the magnetic field is actually dipping into the earth. So the magnetic field is generally more complex than people recognize. You know, in general parlance, it's enough to know magnetic north. Most people don't need to know the magnetic dip in order to get to where they're going. Yes. Now, in the old days, airline pilots...
Dan, can you hold that thought for just 1 minute?
Yeah, you bet.
Go ahead and share your websites where people can find you, as far as our listeners.
Oh, okay. All right. My websites are vortexmaps.com and danshaw.com. And when people send me an email, I will send you a free ebook.
Nice. All right, you guys hold on one moment. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with your questions and more.
The first annual Caribou Paracon is happening September 28th to 30th in the 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia. Brought to you by the Canadian Society of Questers and Spaced Out Radio. Come listen to our featured speaker, Grant Cameron, along with Elizabeth Anglin, Paisley Town, Mike Moran, Eric Cooper, and more. It's a 3-day supernatural adventure at the Spruce Hills Resort and Spa. Tickets for the weekend are $150 Canadian. The Caribou Paracon, celebrating everything paranormal.
Are you tired of being blocked, shadow banned, or placed in jail for simply posting your thoughts on social media? Social Media Freedom can take care of that for you. Social Media Freedom is the newest and one of the best free new apps that allows you the freedom to post what you want, when you want. It takes seconds to download from your app store. Come join the tribe at Social Media Freedom. It's time to set yourself free.
A timepiece is a reflection of who you are, and what better way to show off the real you than with an Escape watch? Escape is a lifestyle brand accessorizing your days and nights. Choose to escape and create the life of discovery that you deserve. Dream, play, unite with your own personalized Escape watch. Head to escapewatches.com. There is no time like the present to enjoy your escape. Use promo code SMF2017 for your 20% discount today.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7, with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
The Call of the Wild is in Vancouver. The Moose Vancouver is one of the hottest bars and restaurants in the city. Open until 2 a.m. nightly, the Moose will rock you like a hurricane all night long. Great food with everything on the menu at $6.95 near the corner of Nelson and Granville. Get your horns up and come rock with us. The Moose Vancouver, the official rocking bar of Spaced Out Radio.
Are you an experiencer? Have you had run-ins with strange creatures you can't explain? ETs, Dogman, Bigfoot, werewolves? They're enough to scare the daylights out of anyone. Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski from your Cop. And on the last Monday of every month, you can listen to me and the host, Dave Scott, talk about the weird and the strange being reported on Spaced Out Radio. I'm going to bring my investigations and sources, you bring your experiences, and we'll figure out the rest together. Strange Days on Spaced Out Radio. Come tune us in at spacedoutradio.com.
You know, it's hard being the bad man of ufology, but that's just the way that I like it. This is Chris George Zuger, and I'll be hanging out with Dave Scott and SOR scientist Chris Cogswell for Reality Paranormal, the second Wednesday of every month. And our job is to break it down and come to conclusions as to what is really going on in the supernatural world. I'd love for you to join us and bring your questions for us to investigate right here on Spaced Out Radio.
There's news, and there's the encounter. This is Spaced Out Radio News Director Everett Thiemer inviting you to check out The Encounter. Our half-hour news segment every Monday through Friday night is different compared to what you're used to. Our goal is to bring you the weird, strange, and interesting stories the mainstream tends to leave out, and stories that will make you scratch your head in disbelief. The Encounter can also be found at spacedoutradio.com and on our Facebook page, SOR The Encounter. Come give us a read.
Do you want to know what's really going on in your world? Do you have questions about who you can trust in the mainstream media? Then look no further than the Rebel Planet. Come get the straight answers right here at spacedoutradio.com. Join me, Jamie Sexton, creator of Rebel Planet News, as I fill you in on the stories behind the stories. All you truth seekers, be sure to tune in to Rebel Planet on spacedoutradio.com the third Thursday of every month.
Hi there, this is Dave Scott from Spaced Out Radio, and I want you to come on a nightly journey. Starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, every Monday through Friday, you can come hang out with me and the other space travelers. We have it all from Carl the Alien bouncing on by to those misfit gnomes causing havoc. It's 3 hours of fun and entertainment on those topics the mainstream really doesn't want to touch. Come get all paranormal with us at spacedoutradio.com, and together, my friends, along with our resident guitar god Bumblefoot, we own the night.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com.
Tonight's show and topic of discussion do not necessarily reflect the opinion of Spaced Out Radio, SOR Media, or its hosts. Listener discretion is advised. Here comes the second hour of Spaced Out Sunday with host Tessa Nicole Thomas. Subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio. And you can follow Tessa on Twitter at Tessa TNT. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back, everyone. So great to have you. We're talking with Dan Shaw, Vortex Detective, tonight. And we're also taking your calls this last hour, as well as from the chat room. And our number for Skype is 970-335-956. That's 970-335-9596. Welcome back, Dan.
Thank you.
Okay, so we had left off on navigating aircraft, I believe.
Yes. I tend to take a very geophysical approach to my study of vortexes. We're talking about paranormal places, so there's definitely a large component of the miraculous going on. I've had quite a number of paranormal and miraculous experiences in my life, and yet I've done my best to merge both brain hemispheres, so to speak, and to merge both the scientific and the paranormal. So I I don't have a full understanding of the phenomenon, but I do take a pretty scientific approach. We're talking about the magnetic field, which I feel is very likely playing a large part in how places affect our physiology and also our psyche, our brain, and how we experience the world. And of course, that does suggest that places that have a strong anomaly in the electromagnetic field may actually throw off our perception of reality. It may influence our perception of reality. And so, let's say somebody flying into the Bermuda Triangle, the electromagnetic field may actually throw off their magnetic compass, may throw off their perceiving, responding, and reacting, and it could explain why people might behave erratically. Where I was going with that was that in the old days, airline pilots would navigate by magnetic compass. Before the days of GPS, pilots navigated by magnetic compass. It was very important for them to have air charts that showed magnetic disturbances. Still true today. If you obtain an aeronautical chart from the FAA in the United States, Federal Aviation Administration, those will actually show magnetic disturbances. You'll see these little rectangles at certain spots. Eastern Oregon, there happen to be quite a number of them around a volcano where there's been continuous eruptions over so many years that volcanologists come to Steens Mountain, Oregon, to study the lava fields there. Okay, so again, I think of vortexes as being any place where there's an anomaly in the electromagnetic field. When magma, molten magma, comes up out of the earth as a volcano, erupts to the surface, and cools and hardens, at a certain point of temperature called the Curie point, the magma, which has no fixed magnetic field, hardens. It takes on the magnetic field that surrounds it. Over time, over geologic ages, the Earth's magnetic field is changing. Meanwhile, these lava fields stay just the way they are. So every lava field is, in effect, a magnetic anomaly or a vortex. Steens Mountain, Oregon, there happens to be a very long history of eruption, and so volcanologists come there to study the paleomagnetic field, in other words, the historical magnetic field. All right, so as you look at the air charts in that area, you'll see these little rectangles that'll indicate, and by air chart I mean aeronautical chart, you'll see rectangles that will say magnetic disturbance of as much as X degrees, 13 degrees sometimes, exists at ground level. And of course, the ocean will say magnetic disturbance of so-and-so many degrees exists at sea level. So there's very hard science, easy way for you to identify where these magnetic disturbances exist, and there is a high correlation between these magnetic disturbances and vortexes.
That's awesome. And I'm just pulling up a couple questions here. We have a double question from Craig. Are you grid sensitive? If so, about 1.2 years ago, around Good Friday, we had a massive spike in the Schumann resonance of Earth. What's your take on this event?
Okay, thanks for asking, Craig. Appreciate it. All right, well, the Schumann resonance is a frequency. It's a resonance in the Earth's field. Now, a vibration occurs in, let's say, a violin. Violin has a very exquisitely shaped cavity. The body of a violin, very beautiful shape designed to enhance that resonant frequency, right? And the Earth is somewhat similar in that between the Earth and the ionosphere, there's a cavity, a resonant cavity between the Earth and the ionosphere. And that frequency is called the Schumann frequency. It's generally considered to be 7.83, more or less. Now, it does vary. It does vary somewhat. But it is, in my opinion, it is relatively fixed because it is based on the cavity between the Earth and the ionosphere. So that's a relatively fixed number. Now, I know there are a lot of researchers who are claiming that the Schumann resonance is increasing. Personally, I haven't yet seen any hard scientific data that would confirm to me that that's actually happening, because that cavity between the Earth and the ionosphere isn't subject to that much change. Now, that's on the gross physical level. Again, I'm not a geophysicist, so my knowledge is somewhat limited. But on an etheric level, yes, on a subtle energy level, it may be true that that frequency is changing or increasing. But I just... If anybody is aware of that hard scientific data, the generally recognized, accepted scientific data that the Schumann resonance is actually increasing, I'd sure like to see it. But if it were, that would suggest that the ionosphere is actually expanding and that somehow the cavity between the Earth and the ionosphere is increasing, and I'm just not aware of that happening.
Okay. Let's see. Our next question comes from Tim, and he's saying, Yosemite, etc., David Paulides has identified areas within with his missing 411 series. Could they be vortices too? Has had identified several dozen. Yosemite, the greatest volume.
Yay! I'm actually silently cheering this question, or maybe not so silently. Thanks for asking. I'm actually headed to Yosemite in a week to give a presentation there. If anybody is in the area of Yosemite and can be there on the 21st and 2nd, I'd love to meet you there. There's a group there, wonderful group called One Tribe Global, and they're hosting this event for me to speak about Yosemite. I have done a fair amount of research around Yosemite. I'm aware of David Paulides' work called The Missing 411. And there does seem to be a cluster of disappearances at Yosemite. David Paulides is a retired, I think, police investigator, takes a very rigorous, very neutral scientific approach to these disappearances, which are otherwise inexplicable. He's weeded out probably 95% of disappearances which have some relatively obvious explanation. He still finds that there's these clusters of inexplicable disappearances around national parks, especially Yosemite. So thanks very much for that question. Yosemite has some very wonderful and complex electromagnetic forces at play. Just the sense of being a valley. When you're down at the bottom of a valley, there's this sense of being very constrained. There's kind of an entry point to Yosemite Valley, which is kind of a throat or a choke point. And so as you're in a valley, you're surrounded by mountains, and the electromagnetic and the gravity field is going to be, let's say, anomalous or unique in the valley there. In the valley, you're also going to have, you've got a lot of these waterfalls. That's negative ions. You've got a very pronounced kind of a wind that happens in valleys. It's up the valley at sometimes and down at others, and rarely across the valley, yes. You've got Little Yosemite Valley, which is like a hot, dry, deserty area where there'd be more positive ions, yes. And there's stories of time slips where people have essentially gone up to Half Dome and back down, passed through all different kinds of electromagnetic fields, and then have, disappeared or witnessed people who seem to be wearing period clothes from other periods, etc. So Yosemite is particularly interesting in a number of ways. David Paulides does not attribute these disappearances to any one thing in particular. He doesn't say it's Bigfoot. He doesn't say it's UFOs. He avoids attributing it to any particular cause. However, he does mention that many of these disappearances have happened in the area of boulder fields. And that's particularly interesting to me for the reason that it does tend to support my electromagnetic hypothesis, in that when you have a rock, such as granite, yes, as you find in that massive batholith, which is the Sierra Nevada mountains. The entire Sierra Nevada is a giant granitic block, which actually intruded. In other words, the magma did not extrude like a volcano, but actually hardened underground, and then was later exposed through uplift and erosion. Okay, so as that granite formed underground, it slowly cooled, and that's the perfect environment for forming crystals. That's how crystals form, is by that slow cooling. Okay, so the entire Sierra Nevadas, including Yosemite Valley, has a ton of granite. That's an understatement. And that granite has a lot of crystal in it. Now, as that area was glaciated, as the glaciers rode over that area in several episodes of glaciation, that granite got broken up and transported. The glaciers pick up these granite boulders, they move them around, and where originally that electromagnetic field, that magnetic imprint of that granite would have been kind of all of, well, there's a lot of variations there, but imagine that you've got essentially one block of granite, all the electromagnetism is kind of lined up, but then it gets broken up, kind of tumbled around, transported, deposited somewhere else in these glacier features called, well, glacial erratic boulders, for example. Now you've got a very complex kind of electromagnetic field. You got this boulder here, it's got this kind of a signature or magnetic stripe, let's say, and this boulder here, and they're all interacting. That's a very complex electromagnetic field around those boulders. And so I find it quite interesting that David Paulides does point to boulder fields as being somehow related to these disappearances. So thanks very much for asking. I'm particularly interested right now in any information anybody else might have about Yosemite. So I do invite you to contact me. I answer all emails to my email, which I'll say is ask@danshaw.com.
Awesome. And thanks so much for asking that question, Tim.
Yay.
Yay, Tim. We have a couple questions here from Trip, and I'll just make it a two-parter. Is it true we can create ley lines? And he's also asking, have you been to any ancient cities in South or Central America?
Well, again, primary principle of alchemy is that separation is an illusion. There is no separation. Everything is one. So we can sense the vortex influences us, and also we influence the vortex. So in my opinion, it is entirely possible for individuals to be able to manipulate these earth energies, to enhance them, to create ley lines and vortexes. And the ancients were building these massive monuments, unbelievably massive monuments, with an awareness of the electromagnetic properties, the geophysical properties of the materials. They built the pyramids with very energetic materials, granite, etc. They layered the materials very much like some kind of an orgone layering that Wilhelm Reich originated this idea of orgone as being like prana or chi, an energy that's available everywhere in the universe. Wilhelm Reich built various devices using a layering. Many of the ancient mounds also have a layering of materials very much orgone-like. So the ancients built these monuments with energetic materials, with an awareness of those materials, to my mind, as a way of enhancing the landscape, making it more fruitful and fertile. And there's ancient folkways, ancient traditions of ranchers penning up their animals, their sheep, for mating in the vicinity of these ancient monuments, standing stones and what have you. Okay, so to my mind, these ancient monuments were built for many reasons, maybe as an initiatory temple, whatever it might be, but also to enhance the fertility of the landscape. So my book, Stonehenge Gardening Tips, is about using earth energies as a way of enhancing your plants to grow better crops and also to enhance your own health of all living cells. I have had the opportunity to visit some of the monuments down in the Yucatan and in Mexico. I've had a chance to see Tulum, Guatemala, Chichen Itza, I should say, Coba, a few points here and there. It's important to recognize that the monuments themselves that are visible are kind of the tip of the iceberg, especially when you look at the Great Pyramid. You couldn't just build a monument like that on sand, and the substructure is far more massive, required more engineering and more materials and time than the pyramids themselves. Down in the Yucatan, there's some exquisite pyramids. There's pyramids, it turns out, all over the world. Pyramids in Italy, pyramids in the Azores. There's these massive ancient monuments built of energetic materials all over the world. And so, yes, I have had a chance to visit some of the monuments down in the Yucatan, for example, and I've spent a little time in Europe and Britain and that kind of thing. And when you go down there, when you visit these monuments, really you can't help being awed and inspired and impacted. And to my mind, it does shift how we feel, how we think, and help really connect us to our place, orient us in a certain sense. I hope that does justice to your question.
Indeed, I hope that helps, Trip. And Dawn had one here, and she's wondering, so if a person was to walk around with a compass, they could pinpoint a vortex?
I wouldn't go quite that far, actually. There's a number of ways of identifying vortexes. I talk about that more in my vortex field guide. I'll just rattle off kind of a few ways that you might recognize a vortex. Vortexes all over the world tend to be 54 miles across and multiples of 54 miles, 108, 216. The Bermuda Triangle vortex is one of these, actually 216 miles across. In my hypothesis, why we find vortexes are these common dimensions, 54 miles across and multiples, that's because the polar circumference of the Earth, in other words, if you measure around the Earth from pole to pole, the polar circumference is a near exact multiple of 27 miles. So when we look at the whole Earth, we could use a musical analogy. We could say that the other vortexes around the Earth, 27 is half of 54. We could see the other vortexes around the Earth as fractions or fractals of the whole Earth, or to use a musical analogy, the whole Earth is a kind of a fundamental note or frequency, and the other vortexes around the Earth are like harmonics of this fundamental frequency. So whether you're looking at air photos or looking at maps, look for circles and half circles that are 54 miles wide or multiples of 54. You can see it in how trees grow. Because roads follow the landscape, they follow rivers, they avoid mountains, this and that. You can actually see just in a road atlas, you can see circles and half circles 54 miles wide. And I've written a book and my Facebook page as well, many, many images. The book's called U.S. Vortexes 54 Miles Wide. So you don't have to be psychic. You can see them from air photos. You can see them on road maps. Look for trees that are growing in unusual ways in response to this spiraling vortex energy. Often, and like, for example, at Confusion Hill, California, the Montana vortex, you find trees growing in unusual ways. Redwoods don't tend to spiral, but at a vortex, you'll see them spiraling. Where trees normally have a spiral in one direction, you'll see them spiraling the other. You'll see branches branching out in unusual ways, where trees usually have nodes where maybe 2 branches have come out, they'll have 5 or such. So you can see it in the plants. You can see it in how animals behave. If you look at rabbit trails, for example, you'll see those following the earth energies. So there are any number of ways. Look for ore in mineral deposit, look for peaks, look for ancient sites like Native American sites, cultural sites. There are any number of ways to identify these vortexes, even if you're not psychic, so to speak.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for that question, Don. And here I had a question. So, can you tell us about the golden vortex?
Sure. I have a friend and co-author who is Nick Nelson. He's been playing with magnets all his life, and he's been researching vortexes for about 50 years because he feels that the vortexes may hold the key to magnetic motor. So he was actually able to find a pattern of magnets which recreates the healing energies of the vortex, and in some cases actually recreates this shrink and grow phenomena that we've seen. And I did appear on the History Channel on Brad Meltzer's Decoded. There was an episode called Devil's Triangle, Alaska, and where I demonstrated this little device called the Golden Vortex. It's a little pendant. It's about the size of a $50. It's got usually a couple of magnets in it in a certain pattern. And if people are sensitive to these energies, they can often, if you feel crystal energy, etc., earth energy, very likely feel the energy from this little $50 pendant called the Golden Vortex. They're available at goldenvortex.com and also through my website. We have very many testimonials of people experiencing healing around these magnetic fields. And it comes with a 60-day guarantee. If you don't enjoy the device, you can always return it. So that's a device that's essentially a portable vortex.
Yeah, and I watched that show that you were on the History Channel, and you guys had actually used the Golden Vortex, and it was so cool to see the grow-shrink theory. I believe it's called. Isn't that what it is?
Oh, we call it the shrink and grow, and the couple of hosts on the show, Buddy and McKinley, they were shocked at anybody to actually see it work. I was a little shocked too, actually, because what you don't see, what they cut out was a minute earlier I had tried to demonstrate dowsing rods. I'm not that practiced with dowsing rods. I probably didn't demonstrate it right. I was trying to stay in frame of camera, and I was trying to show that McKinley is actually a vortex. I was going to douse her energy field. I couldn't get it to work. The director says, well, you better throw those offset. Have you got anything else? I say, yeah, I've got this Golden Vortex. And I was able to shrink and grow them right there. We were just on the waterfront in Olympia, actually. And there's a couple of pictures of that on my website where I was doing the shrink and grow with this little device, this magnetic healing device called the Golden Vortex.
Yeah, and leave it to me to get it backwards. I'm always getting stuff backwards. Grow and shrink. No, it's shrink and grow.
That happens in a vortex. Things get flipped around.
Yeah, I think I'm living in one. It explains everything. But that's pretty cool that you can own your own vortex and actually do your own experiments with it.
In fact, let me it one step further. Nick Nelson retired and moved to Oregon about 30 years ago. He moved to Oregon in order to live near and work at the Oregon Vortex so he could do further research. After some years, things kind of there for him. He moved to Montana to work at the Montana Vortex. He's been working here for about 10 years at the Montana Vortex. At this point, we'd be very happy to find a location to set up another Vortex tourist attraction. If you happen to have a spot that would be suitable for a Vortex tourist attraction, if you feel you're out of Vortex, if it's kind of a commercial location, we would love to set up our own Vortex tourist attraction. So I'll put that out there.
Yeah, that would be awesome. So we have another question here. Oh, if I could get it to turn. And this one is from Dawn. And she says, if the larger vortex map can be broken down mathematically, would I be correct to assume then smaller vortexes should be coherent to a map also?
Oh, nice. The Earth-star globe that we mentioned earlier being made up of these 30 diamonds showing the geometric shape of the Earth, the geometric relationship between ancient monuments, between the Great Pyramid, Easter Island, Bermuda Triangle, etc. This is, these ley lines on that are the, let's say, the major ley lines, but certainly it's fractal. As you zoom in, you can see more fine details, more lines. You see very beautiful patterns and correspondences between these finer lines and monuments, for example, in Europe and Britain. And so, yes, there are definitely major lines of the Earth grid and then minor lines of the Earth grid. And it's almost like knock and the door shall be opened. You find what you look for. You see what you focus on. And so we find other patterns all over the world. The Earth star North America doesn't seem to correspond exactly perfectly with our Earth grid. That seems to be a slightly different thing, but we find these wheels and wheels within wheels all over the world. Some places, there's a number of different kinds of visionary maps. I'll mention, we find the straight lines, we find the sinuous lines. Sometimes we find triangles, equilateral triangles seem to broadcast a very stable signal. Sometimes we find stars, five-pointed stars and such. Sometimes we find patterns of chakras. There's all kinds of visionary maps. Sometimes visionary maps involve figures that look human or animal-like. So there's kind of a broad range of visionary maps, and I like to focus in on the ones that are geometric, and you'll find these all over the world. And that's, again, at my vortexmaps.com, I've compiled probably nearly 100 different visionary maps of various kinds.
Yeah, it's so awesome.
If you were to send me an email and say, I live here, are there vortexes in my area? What are the vortexes in my area? I can help you identify vortexes in your area.
So we have a question here from Craig, and he's asking, under normal conditions, a tree will grow in a very specific way using fractal algorithms. Sorry. He can chart the growth of the tree with a 2-inch slab. Have you ever thought about testing these algorithms on these trees that have taken strange shapes?
Well, I'm not totally sure I understand that question. That might be a little over my head, but let me see if I can approach an answer to.
Yeah, and somebody earlier was stating that in a vortex, like, you get twisted trees and such.
Sure. That's certainly true. I'm not quite sure what he means by these 2-inch slabs, but let me approach the answer in this way. Everything in nature has a geometry. Our brainwaves have a geometry to them. In transcendental meditation, we say that brainwaves in ordinary waking state tend to be incoherent. They don't tend to cohere and fall into these nice geometric and harmonic patterns. transcendental meditation or any kind of meditation might help bring our brain waves into more harmony and coherence. Everything in nature is actually calling our brain into greater coherence. Trees, all kinds of plants, they're all growing in exquisite geometric and harmonic proportions. When we walk in the woods, all those things are helping bring our brainwaves into greater coherence. Now, trees are actually very fine antennae. They function just as an antenna. In fact, the reason that we can have such small mobile phones is that somebody figured out that you don't need a massive antenna or an antenna of a large size, because you can shrink down the size of antenna you need by using a fractal. Okay, if you're not familiar with fractal, these are some beautifully, very beautiful patterns, mathematical patterns where they look similar. They have self-similarity at different scales. As you zoom in and zoom in, the same patterns recur. That's a fractal. Trees are just this way. Different trees have different frequencies for sure. In wartime, antennas are very important. They're vulnerable and expensive. So much research, or some research, has been done on using trees as antennas, and it does turn out that trees do make suitable antennas for ultra-low frequencies, especially with some signal processing. You can actually use a tree as an antenna. So the trees are picking up frequencies based on their size and shape. So there's some very beautiful, you could call them algorithms. They're essentially, I think, mathematical formulas, like the Fibonacci sequence, which is a mathematical sequence of numbers that generates this beautiful Fibonacci spiral. There's a couple different kind of spirals. I don't want to confuse them, but I think that touches on the question of the shape, the proportion of trees, and how they receive and generate energies, subtle energies. So if you want to restate that question in an email to me, you can email me through danshaw.com, and I'll take another stab at answering that question for you.
Yeah, and it does make me wonder, like, does a tree grow differently in a vortex area? Does it have a more rapid rate of growth? And I think that's where the 2-inch slab is, because that's generally how they'll count how old the tree is and stuff like that.
Ah, like that. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yes, I do propose that the vortexes do enhance the life force, and that plants and animals do grow better in a vortex, or you could, in effect, build a pyramid in your garden and plant around your pyramid, in and above your pyramid, and you could do various experiments to see at what distance from the pyramid seems to enhance plant growth. Take any number of seeds and grow some inside a pyramid, some outside a pyramid, above, below. Have some control seeds, and researchers have definitely found, and historians, anthropologists find that there's long tradition of indigenous people taking their seeds to a pyramid or to a sacred mountain as a way of enhancing the vitality of the seeds, increasing the production of the crops. And there's a very beautiful book where I always flip the name around. And I'm going to have trouble pulling it up at this hour, but there's a very wonderful book by an author named Halberg, Halberg, where he finds that, first of all, he was a scientist using what he called ion bombardment to see if he could enhance the vitality of seeds. He found he has some patents. I think his first name is Kaj, Kaj, Kaj Halberg, Halberg. B-E-R-G. And he has some patents to his name showing how he can use ion cascades to enhance the vitality of seeds. That was where he got his start. And then he went on to find that these ancient monuments essentially did the same thing. They created these ion cascades that did enhance the vitality of seeds, and that these indigenous people had tradition of bringing their seeds to the monuments for a brief time before they planted their crops.
Yeah, and then Craig's back in here and he says the 2-inch slab can be used with a fractal algorithm to tell how many branches and roots the tree will have.
Far out. I'd love to see that. If you could send me some information on that, I'd sure love to see it.
Yeah, that'd be awesome indeed. So Dawn has a question, and she's wondering, would a vortex change crystal growth?
Oh, gosh. Interesting. Well, crystals are, in a sense, living things. They do grow. As I say, ideal place for forming or for growing crystals is you take a very, very hot material, a molten material, and you cool it slowly, and that's how crystals are formed. And again, in my opinion, vortexes are in effect everywhere because they're anywhere that there is a variation in the electromagnetic field. NASA and the space agencies around the world are definitely experimenting with growing plants and animals and crystals in space, in the microgravity of space. And we do find that when you do grow crystals in a lab, let's say, they do have some very distinct properties. And perhaps the most best respected researcher in this regard is the researcher named Marcel Vogel. And his work is fascinating in terms of using natural and artificial crystals, or synthetic crystals might be a better word, and also in using very different kinds of faceting of crystals. Quartz crystal has a structure where you tend to get a hexagonal crystal, a crystal with 6 faces. And Marcel Vogel is cutting crystals with various numbers of faces, 13 faces, etc. And you do get some very interesting properties and results with quartz crystals when you grow them synthetically, when you facet them differently. And because the quartz crystal has such a regular structure, it grows in those facets, got a very regular structure. It turns out to be very useful in modern electronics, of course. And the more I study crystals, the more I am a true believer in that, again, even holding a quartz crystal will tend to heat it up. Laying it in the sun will heat it up. When you heat it up, it expands. It creates more pressure. It's going to change the electromagnetic field. And when you think about structures such as the Great Pyramid, that's out sitting there in the desert in Egypt. I'm not sure it was always desert there. At one time, the Nile River flowed very close to the pyramids there. It was very fertile at one time. But think about that structure sitting out in the desert there, heating up in the sun. At least maybe the upper layers are going to be heating up. Inside of the pyramid, though, things are going to remain very cool, just as things remain cool under the earth. And you find very many of these monuments built of energetic materials also involve very elaborate and exquisitely engineered hydraulics water systems. So you'll find these structures all over the world used water and channeled water, and I would imagine, you can imagine, that the water that flowed in and around under the pyramids and these other monuments, and I'll mention the Akapana pyramid a.k.a. P-A-N-A. The Acapana Pyramid, I believe it's in Bolivia, is one which has a very exquisite structure and a hydraulic structure for channeling water and such. And you can imagine that water that flowed through these structures would also have been energized, and then that water could have been used then to water the crops. That was also true around Lake Titicaca, very elaborate and developed agriculture where they were using the water from Lake Titicaca, channeling it through various structures, and then watering their crops with that energized water. And I know that didn't maybe directly answer the question, but I hope we touched on some interesting sidelines there.
For sure. Well, I have a question here. Do you think that vortexes can be deplenished or soiled by human activity at vortex points of interest, such as the Montana vortex or anywhere else people would regularly visit?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do feel that some places that, let's say, are barely touched by human hands, I like to call them islands of infinity. I think at those places, it's likely that it's kind of, the energy is more clear, more beneficial, easier to access. And I have heard from a number of people that the vortexes, according to some people, have kind of moved away from Sedona. At one time, Sedona was kind of a sleepy little town with a bunch of crystal shops and everything. Of course, there's a bunch of roads going through now and seemingly a real estate office on every corner. And I've heard some people say that Sedona might not have the same activity as it once had, and that the energetic points have kind of moved off. So I'm fond of this expression, islands of infinity. There's certain places which still remain remote and relatively unsoiled. And these, I think, would have kind of a clearer energy. Yes.
All right. And I have another question, and this goes right along with a question that Craig just asked. Can you tell us a bit more about your most interesting experiences and knowledge you've gained researching these sacred places in the U.S. and beyond? And Craig was asking, what's the most mind-blowing discovery or experience in your life?
Oh, gosh. All good questions. And as I said earlier, I came to vortexes in perhaps something of a roundabout way. I came to geomancy through my study of alchemy. I say vortexes are paranormal places, and my first earliest paranormal experiences I can't attribute directly to the place, but since I've been traveling around and visited these places, I do feel that I've been emotionally very deeply touched by these places. I feel that the deeper I go, the closer I come to this shamanic kind of a worldview, that everything is conscious and alive and divine. And I've had, I would say, a couple close encounters. The one with the UFO, I can't attribute to a vortex directly, but I have spent a couple summers living on the property at the Montana Vortex. And the owner there, Joe Hauser, is a Bigfoot researcher. And I think that our consciousness does play a part in calling in the UFOs, in manifesting crop circles, and in inviting in contact with Bigfoot, for example, or even the orbs. I think consciousness plays a very big part. Joe has an affinity with the Bigfoot. When you come to the Montana Vortex, you can see he's got a collection of casts of imprints of Bigfoot that he obtained from a professor who's a Bigfoot researcher. And Joe will go out on the vortex some nights and he'll whoop as a way of calling to the Bigfoot. And a couple years ago, I was living on the property late at night. I heard a whooping sound. I guess I would describe it. I knew it wasn't Joe, because when you know somebody, you know the timbre of their voice. You can tell if it's them, no matter what kind of a sound they make. And I heard a sound which was like nothing else, really. The next morning, I had to ask Joe, were you out there whooping in the woods last night? I knew the answer was going to be no. He was not out in the woods whooping. And so I feel that I did hear a Bigfoot. I've had experience where I was with a friend who's quite psychic, and we were meditating. I was not settling down. I was kind of bouncing, more than kind of. I was kind of fidgeting around, and I heard what I thought was a horse. Well, we were on a 360-acre property. There weren't any horses in miles. When we came out of the meditation, she says, "Did you see it?" I said, "What?" She said, "Well, did you see the unicorn?" I said, "No, I didn't see a unicorn." And she said, "Well," and then I said, "Well, I thought I heard a horse." And there was no horses anywhere nearby. Not at all. The Montana Vortex, we do frequently see, we've had some Bigfoot sightings, and last week I did see some Bigfoot signs. Now, Bigfoot researchers do report that say they'll be walking on a trail through the woods, and when they return along that same trail, they'll notice that now there's these two massive trees laid down in an X across the trail, something like that. That's kind of a typical kind of a Bigfoot sign. They let you know that they're around. Mm-hmm. Well, about a week ago at the Montana Vortex, I saw a couple of stones put in the middle of a walkway in front of the private residence. And we're pretty tidy around there in our way. And those definitely jumped out at me as being out of place. They weren't massive boulders or anything, just a couple of stones in the path. But I had to ask around, hey, did anybody put a couple of stones in the middle of the path in the private residence? Nobody had. So I take that as, the Bigfoot are around and they're leaving little signs around, and you have to be alert to it sometimes. But those are a couple of my most profound experiences. And the list is rather lengthy.
But those are like really amazing experiences. We have
yes, they are. Yes, they are. The sounds, of course, those vanish in an instant, those sounds, and it's a little hard to retain them in memory in a way. But when we are alert to the possibility of something, whether it's psychic abilities or whatever it is, when you believe in the possibility, when you have the intention, and when you have the desire, possibility, intention, and desire are the three motive factors in the universe, in my opinion. Anything is possible. Possibility, intention, and desire are the three keys to manifestation.
Indeed, and I do believe that anything is possible, and I wish more people were so open-minded. But Craig, he's asking, have you considered DMT, the consciousness link between everything?
It's certainly possible to use substances such as DMT to crack through our ordinary consciousness and experience extraordinary expanded states of consciousness. That is one path that may be suitable for some people. I would agree there is an appropriate and sacred use for substances such as DMT, peyote, whatever it might be, ayahuasca. It's not necessarily one of my paths or favorite paths to use these other substances, because I believe our brain is infinite and capable of all miracles. But for some people, that can be an appropriate thing at an appropriate time when used in a sacred way. And I respect that, certainly. It's always important to have a guide with you. I have some background in using breath work, just plain breathing, breath work, sometimes called rebirthing, using a connected breath as a way of cracking through and essentially doing a 1-hour vision quest. It's entirely possible, just using connected breathing, to enter into these expanded and mystical states. So I really don't find much need for these external substances. But for some people, they can be used, and certainly there's indications at sacred places such as Chaco Canyon and around the megaliths in Britain and Europe and such. You almost always find some kind of psychotropic, psychoactive plants growing around those ancient monuments and in association with the petroglyphs and the paintings, pictographs and such at these sacred sites.
Awesome. And it is pretty awesome how breathing techniques can release certain chemicals naturally in your body and, take you on that natural quest. We're coming up on our last 2 minutes. And
yes.
So my last question to you is, where is your path taking you? Where do you feel like your quest for the vortex will lead you?
Well, again, for me, geomancy is one subset of alchemy. So for me, the ultimate goal is to follow my teachers, to drop all limitations, to physically achieve physical immortality and then physical ascension, which for me is merging out into everything in the universe, dropping all limitations, merging out with everything in the universe. So that's the direction that I hope I'm trending. I hope that the opposite of birth is not death, but the opposite of birth is ascension.
That's awesome. And Craig said, I meant being that DMT is in all living things. Cool.
Oh.
So,
okay.
Let's see.
Well, I hope we didn't go off the mark then.
Yeah, but when you hear DMT, you automatically think a substance, which is naturally produced by the body, but it's also out there.
True that. And again, sure, just like, let's say, cannabis, the only reason that these things influence us at all is because we vibrate with them, we're like them, we have, cannabinoids in, not just in marijuana, but other plants, and we have natural endocannabinoids in our own body. There has to be some likeness between us and these substances for them to affect us at all. So, and again, nothing separate, everything's totally connected.
And that is so true. We are all connected, and we're all in this together. So, would you like to give us your websites and books and perhaps shows or movies that you've been on for our guests, our listeners to check out?
Oh, thanks for asking again. I'm Dan Shaw. I have one website, which is danshaw.com, and another called vortexmaps.com, and I encourage you to contact me there directly with your questions. You'll see that I've got a number of books, the Vortex Field Guide, U.S. Vortexes 54 miles wide, and Letters from the Vortex. You might have caught me on or catch me on Brad Meltzer's Decoded. They're rerunning this episode quite frequently called Devil's Triangle, Alaska. And also recommend to you a movie. It should be available on Amazon and Hulu called Ancient Tomorrow by my friend J.J. Yosh, where I have a minute or so of screen time. It's a quite well done film on the subject of ancient monuments and the possibility that the pyramids were part of an ancient system of generating clean and free energy.
That is so cool. Well, thank you so much to my guest, Dan Shaw. It was so wonderful having you on the show this evening. I'm so glad you could come back and try again, despite Spreaker issues. It was so great having you, and I thank you for coming in after a long day of work to inform us all on Vortexes.
Thank you so much, everybody, for all your great questions. It's been my honor, everybody, to infinity and beyond.
Thanks, Dan. And thank you to everyone in Spaced Out Radio, Facebook, Spreaker, Twitter, Paranormal Radio, TalkStream Live, Deep Talk Radio, and wherever else you may be listening in the universe tonight. I had a wonderful time this evening. It was my pleasure. I can't wait to do it again tomorrow, as well as next weekend on spacedoutradio.com. Don't forget, we are all in this together. Together we can make the world a little better, and together, my friends, we own the night. Until next time, nighty-night, love and light to all my space cases out there. You guys have a wonderful rest of your weekend. I'll see you tomorrow. And you guys have a good night's sleep. Bye-bye.